on Facebook. We are online on YouTube. Awesome. Well, hello and welcome everyone who chooses to join on this Tuesday, June 15th, or maybe later on during the week or on any other day. So, hi, Ed. Good to see you. Thank you for joining. I know others will probably be here later. But yeah, thank you for joining today as we do our study. We are kind of continuing, and actually, we're basically at the end of our discussion of kind of named women in the book of Genesis with the person of Tamar. And so we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 38 today. There's one person, Dinah, that we're not spending time on right now because it makes more sense to talk about her in conjunction with Tamar, David's daughter. And so, other than that, though, we've kind of gone through every named woman who gets a significant amount of time in the text and just spent time kind of seeing how God used them and what God had to say there. And today we're going to come to the story of Judah and Tamar, which was always a really odd story to come to. So, just kind of as a forewarning, if you're not familiar with the story, is that this is a story that talks a lot about prostitution and who's sleeping with whom. It's in the Bible, obviously, and there's a lot of good stuff that's coming out of that. But this is what we're doing. So. Now can you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. Probably. Well, that's fun. Okay, well, hopefully I can be heard now. Okay, sweet. I don't know why the thing was pretending it could hear me. But okay, cool. Well, then thank you for that. Thank you for bearing with me for the last 3 minutes then. So what I was saying was that we are looking at Genesis chapter 38 right now. And in Genesis chapter 38, we're discussing the stories of Judah and Tamar. And this is effectively our last stop in the book of Genesis for this series, as we've been going through the major women that show up in Genesis, the major women who kind of get a lot of screen time, a lot of attention paid to them. We stop with Tamar. One person that we did kind of skip over, though, is Dinah, and that's because if we continue along this path, it makes the most sense to talk about Dinah in conjunction with Tamar, who is David's daughter, later on in the story of David. So we'll kind of move, or we might look at her later on, but Tamar is kind of the last figure for this particular text. And as we open up Genesis chapter 38, the question before us is, who is Judah? Who did he start as in the book of Genesis, and where does he kind of end up in the book of Genesis? Because this story also marks a pivot point or a turning point for him. And we know that ultimately, if we go past the book of Genesis, he's going to be his family line is arguably the most important family line, as out of Judah comes David, out of Judah comes Solomon, out of Judah comes every good king that Israel ever has, including and most especially and particularly Jesus himself. And so Judah is tremendously important through the course of the whole Bible, but just looking at the book of Genesis, what do we have to say about him? And so we turn to Genesis chapter 39, which we had read a little bit of last week. And talking about Leah, it says, she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. Then she ceased bearing. And so Judah means something like praise, or sounds something like praise. It's kind of a play on that word. And it's notable when Judah is born, because the first three children are all named in reference to the struggle that she has with Jacob. So Reuben, Simon, and Levi are all named some variation of, maybe now my husband will love me. Maybe now my husband will pay attention to me. And that their names all come out of that feeling and that sentiment. And when you come to Judah, Judah is different. His name is just talking about praising the Lord. And that's going to actually be meaningful, because one thing that we're going to hit in just a moment is that Judah kind of takes on the role of the firstborn. The first three, their lives are marred by strife. Both Reuben, Simon, and Levi, all of their lives are marred by strife. They're kind of characterized by strife. And so when it comes time to find a leader among the children of Jacob, while Joseph is gone, Joseph is kind of in his own special category. And if Joseph's in his own special category, the person who takes on that role pretty consistently is actually Judah. We're going to see that in this next text as Joseph has been captured and they're considering what they should do with him. Reuben has kind of developed a plan that maybe he'll save Joseph on his own accord, but Reuben is gone for the moment. And then in Genesis chapter 37, verses 25 through 28, we read about the brothers, the sons of Jacob. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. And so we get this mixed bag of Judah. On the one hand, he does say, let's not lay our hands on Joseph, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And we feel good about that statement. On the other hand, of course, he is choosing to sell his brother. And so they do this, then they go and they dip Joseph's robe into blood and present it before Jacob, allow Jacob to wail at the loss of his son. And kind of the story progresses, and at the end, as Joseph is about to kind of make his big reveal, saying who he is, they end up at this crisis point. And the crisis point is that Joseph asked to keep Benjamin with him in Egypt rather than allow Benjamin to return back home to Jacob. And the brothers are afraid. The brothers are worried and nervous. They don't know how to get out of the situation. And Judah, kind of stepping into that surrogate eldest role, steps up and makes an impassioned plea. And he ends his plea in Genesis chapter 44, verses 33 and 34, where it reads, now therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord in place of the boy being Benjamin.
and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the suffering that would come upon my father. And so he moves from this person who his father has a favorite son, Joseph, and he chooses to sell him into slavery. He moves from that person, and really through this story that we're about to hit, he moves from that person to the sort of person who says, let me take my brother's place rather than have my father grieve in that way. Last thing about who Judah is. In Genesis chapter 49, Jacob says a blessing upon each of his sons. And he pronounces a fairly lengthy blessing upon Judah. And I'm going to read it in its entirety. It says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be